Marcus Thompson had always believed in doing the right thing, even when it cost him. At 32, the construction worker from Detroit had seen enough injustice in his neighborhood to know that sometimes good people had to stand up, even when the odds were stacked against them. His weathered hands told the story of a man who worked hard for everything he had, and his gentle eyes revealed a soul that couldn't walk away from someone in trouble. On that cold Tuesday morning in November, Marcus was walking home from his night shift at the construction site. The streets were nearly empty, with only the occasional car passing by and the distant hum of the city waking up. He pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders and quickened his pace, thinking about the warm breakfast his wife Sarah would have waiting for him. They had been married for 8 years, and she always made sure he had something hot to eat when he came home from work. As Marcus turned the corner onto Maple Street, he heard shouting coming from the alley behind the old pharmacy. His first instinct was to keep walking. In this neighborhood, you learned to mind your own business if you wanted to stay safe. But something about the voice made him stop. It was high-pitched and desperate, filled with genuine terror that made his stomach clench with worry. He looked around the empty street, then slowly walked toward the alley. The shouting was getting louder, and now he could hear other voices too. Deeper voices, threatening and angry. Marcus pressed himself against the brick wall of the pharmacy and carefully peered around the corner into the dimly lit alley. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 men in dark clothing had cornered a young woman against the far wall of the alley. She looked to be in her early 20s with long brown hair and a blue nurse's uniform that was now torn and dirty. Her purse lay scattered on the ground, its contents spilled across the wet pavement. The men were demanding something from her, and she was shaking her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest. He could call the police, but by the time they arrived, it might be too late. The young woman's eyes were wide with fear, and one of the men was reaching into his jacket. Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He couldn't just stand there and watch someone get hurt when he had the power to help. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped into the alley. His construction boots made a loud scraping sound on the concrete, and all 4 people turned to look at him. The 3 men immediately tensed up, their hands moving to their pockets. The young woman's eyes filled with hope when she saw him, but Marcus could also see the fear there. She was afraid that now 2 people might get hurt instead of just 1. "Hey, is everything okay here?" Marcus called out, trying to keep his voice steady and calm. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered from years of construction work, but he wasn't looking for a fight. He just wanted to give the young woman a chance to get away safely. The largest of the 3 men, a guy with a shaved head and numerous tattoos covering his arms, stepped forward. "This ain't your business, friend. Keep walking." His voice was low and threatening, and Marcus could see that he was trying to hide something behind his back. Marcus didn't move. "I think I'll stick around for a minute," he said, looking directly at the young woman. "Miss, do you need help?" She nodded quickly, her eyes darting between Marcus and the 3 men who had her trapped. The situation was escalating quickly, and Marcus knew he was in danger, but he also knew that he couldn't live with himself if he walked away, and something terrible happened to this innocent person. His father had taught him that a man's character was measured not by what he did when people were watching, but by what he did when nobody was around to see it. Right now, nobody was watching except for 4 strangers in a dark alley, and Marcus was about to prove what kind of man he really was. The standoff in the alley lasted only seconds, but to Marcus it felt like hours. The 3 men were clearly not expecting anyone to interfere with their plans, and the surprise had given both Marcus and the young woman a small advantage. She slowly started moving along the wall, trying to edge closer to where Marcus stood at the mouth of the alley. "Look, man, we don't want any trouble," the second attacker said, but his hand never left his jacket pocket. "This is just a misunderstanding between friends." He was shorter than the first man, but looked meaner, with cold eyes that seemed to calculate every possible way the situation could unfold. Marcus shook his head. "Doesn't look like friendship to me," he replied firmly. "Why don't you guys just walk away and we'll call it even?" He was hoping they would take the easy way out, but deep down he knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Men like this didn't back down just because someone asked them nicely. The young woman had managed to move about halfway toward Marcus when the third attacker, who had been silent up until now, suddenly lunged forward and grabbed her arm. She screamed and tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. "Nobody's going anywhere until we get what we came for." he snarled, yanking her back toward the corner. That was when Marcus knew talking wasn't going to work. Without thinking about the consequences, he rushed forward into the alley. His years of construction work had made him strong and fast, and he reached the third man before any of them could react. Marcus grabbed the attacker's wrist and twisted hard, forcing him to release the young woman's arm. "Run!" Marcus shouted to her, and she didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted toward the street while Marcus grappled with the man who had grabbed her, but the other two attackers recovered quickly from their surprise and joined the fight. The battle in the alley was brutal and desperate. Marcus was outnumbered 3-1, but he fought with the fury of a man protecting someone innocent. He managed to land several solid punches, drawing blood from at least two of his opponents, but they kept coming, and eventually their numbers began to tell. Just as Marcus was starting to worry that he might not be able to hold them off much longer, the sound of sirens filled the air. The young woman had made it to the street and called for help. The three attackers heard the sirens too, and suddenly their priorities changed. Instead of continuing the fight, they wanted to get away as quickly as possible. But as they tried to flee, something went terribly wrong. In the chaos and confusion, with sirens getting louder and everyone trying to move at once, one of the attackers dropped something that clattered across the alley floor. It was a knife, and in the dim light it looked dark and wet. The police arrived just as the three men were climbing over the back fence of the alley. Two officers immediately gave chase while two others secured the scene. Marcus stood there breathing heavily, his shirt torn and his face bruised, trying to explain what had happened. The young woman was safe at the mouth of the alley, wrapped in a blanket that one of the paramedics had given her. But something was wrong. As Marcus tried to tell the police officers his version of events, he noticed they weren't really listening. They were looking at the knife on the ground, then at the blood on Marcus's hands, then at each other with expressions he couldn't quite read. "Sir, we're going to need you to put your hands behind your back," one of the officers said, reaching for his handcuffs. Marcus stared at him in confusion. "What, why? I was helping her. I was trying to protect her from those guys." The officer's face was grim. "Sir, we have a situation here. We've got a weapon, we've got blood, and we've got conflicting reports about what happened. We need to sort this out at the station." Marcus felt his world starting to spin. "Conflicting reports? What do you mean, conflicting reports? Ask her, she'll tell you what happened." He looked toward the young woman, expecting her to confirm his story, but she was talking to another officer and seemed to be in shock. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus realized that trying to do the right thing had just landed him in the worst trouble of his life. The three real criminals had escaped, and somehow he was the one being arrested. The irony was bitter and cruel, but there was nothing he could do about it now except hope that the truth would eventually come out. The news of Marcus Thompson's arrest spread quickly through the small community where he lived. His wife Sarah was devastated when she got the call from the police station. She had been waiting for him to come home from his night shift, and instead she learned that her husband was being charged with assault and attempted robbery. The shock was so overwhelming that she could barely speak when the officer explained what had supposedly happened. Sarah knew her husband better than anyone in the world, and she knew without a doubt that he would never hurt an innocent person. Marcus was the kind of man who caught spiders in the house and released them outside rather than killing them. He was the kind of man who gave money to homeless people, even when they could barely afford groceries themselves. The idea that he would attack a young woman for money was so absurd that Sarah almost laughed, despite her tears. But nobody seemed to believe her when she tried to tell them who Marcus really was. The neighbors whispered among themselves, some defending Marcus while others wondered if they had ever really known him at all. The local newspaper picked up the story, and suddenly Marcus Thompson became known throughout the city as the construction worker who had attacked a nurse in broad daylight. At the hospital, Jennifer Walsh was slowly recovering from her concussion. The doctors had told her that memory loss was common with head injuries, and that her memories might return gradually over time. But right now, the events in the alley were like pieces of a puzzle scattered in her mind, impossible to put together in any way that made sense. What Jennifer did remember was being terrified, and she remembered a big man in work clothes. But the details were fuzzy and confused. Sometimes she thought there had been other people in the alley, but when she tried to focus on those memories, they slipped away like smoke. The police had shown her a photograph of Marcus, and while he looked familiar, she couldn't say for certain whether he had been helping her or hurting her. Meanwhile, Detective Cole was conducting his own investigation into the case. Something about the whole situation bothered him, and he had learned over the years to pay attention when something felt wrong. He started by researching Marcus Thompson's background, looking for any history of violence or criminal behavior. What he found surprised him. Marcus had no criminal record whatsoever. He had been married to the same woman for 8 years. He had worked at the same construction company for over a decade, and everyone who knew him described him as honest, reliable, and helpful. His supervisor at work said that Marcus was the kind of employee who stayed late to help coworkers and never complained about overtime or difficult assignments. Detective Cole also looked into the witness, Mrs. Rodriguez. She was elderly and had admitted to the responding officers that she wasn't wearing her glasses when she looked out the window. She also said that the incident happened very quickly and that she might have missed some details. When Cole interviewed her again, she seemed less certain about exactly what she had seen. But the real breakthrough came when Cole decided to canvass the neighborhood more thoroughly. He spent hours knocking on doors and asking if anyone else had seen or heard anything unusual that morning. Most people had been asleep or getting ready for work and hadn't noticed anything. But on his 4th day of interviews, he found someone who had seen something important. Tony Martinez worked the night shift at a gas station 3 blocks away from the pharmacy. He had been walking home that morning and had seen 3 men running through the neighborhood just after the police sirens started. They had been moving fast and looking over their shoulders, like people who were running from something. Tony hadn't thought much about it at the time, but when Detective Cole described the incident in the alley, Tony realized that the timing matched perfectly. They definitely looked like they were up to no good, Tony told the detective. One of them was carrying something that looked like it might be a knife, and they were all dirty and roughed up, like they'd been in a fight. This was the first evidence that supported Marcus's story about there being other people in the alley. Detective Cole asked Tony to work with a police artist to create sketches of the 3 men he had seen. The descriptions matched similar crimes that had been reported in the area over the past several months. As Detective Cole dug deeper into these other crimes, a pattern began to emerge. Someone had been targeting healthcare workers, particularly nurses who worked late shifts. The attacks always happened in isolated areas, and the criminals always seemed to know when their victims would be alone and vulnerable. This wasn't random crime. It was organized and planned. The more Cole learned, the more convinced he became that Marcus Thompson was innocent. But proving it would require more than just suspicious coincidences and witness statements. He needed solid evidence, and he needed Jennifer Walsh to remember what had really happened in that alley. Cole decided to visit Jennifer at the hospital one more time. Maybe if he approached the conversation differently, he could help her piece together her memories without pressuring her or influencing what she remembered. The truth was in her mind somewhere, locked away behind the trauma and confusion of her injury. All he had to do was find a way to help her unlock it. The police station was a cold, sterile place that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Marcus sat in the interrogation room for what felt like hours, his hands still stained with blood that wasn't his own, trying to make sense of what had happened. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything look darker and more sinister than it should have. Detective Raymond Cole entered the room carrying a thick folder and a cup of coffee that steamed in the cold air. He was a veteran officer with 23 years on the force, and he had seen enough to know that the truth wasn't always as simple as it appeared. But the evidence in this case seemed pretty straightforward, and none of it was good for Marcus Thompson. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Cole said, settling into the chair across from Marcus, "let's go over this one more time. You say you were walking home from work when you heard someone calling for help in the alley behind the pharmacy on Maple Street. Is that correct?" Marcus nodded, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders. "Yes, that's exactly what happened. I heard a woman screaming, and when I looked, I saw 3 men attacking her. I couldn't just walk away and let them hurt her." Detective Cole opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. "The problem, Mr. Thompson, is that we have a different story from another witness, someone who saw the whole thing from their apartment window across the street." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean, a different story? What did they say?" The detective slid one of the photographs across the table. It showed the alley from above, taken from what must have been a 3rd-floor window. Mrs. Ellen Rodriguez was having trouble sleeping and was looking out her window when she saw the incident. According to her statement, she saw you approach a young woman in the alley and demand money from her. When she refused, you became aggressive. That's not what happened, Marcus protested, his voice rising. I was helping her. Those 3 men were already there when I arrived. Detective Cole held up a hand. Mrs. Rodriguez says she called the police as soon as she saw you grab the woman. She doesn't mention seeing any other men in the alley. Marcus stared at the photograph, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. She's mistaken. Maybe she couldn't see clearly from that far away. Or maybe she didn't see the whole thing. What about the woman? What did she tell you? The detective's expression grew even more serious. That's another problem, Mr. Thompson. The victim, Jennifer Walsh, is in the hospital right now. She suffered a concussion during the incident and is having trouble remembering exactly what happened. The doctors say her memory might come back, but right now she can't give us a clear statement. Marcus felt like the walls were closing in around him. The one person who could prove his innocence was in the hospital with memory problems, and the only witness was telling a story that made him look guilty. This is insane. I risked my life to help her. Why would I hurt someone I was trying to protect? Detective Cole leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus carefully. People do strange things, Mr. Thompson. Sometimes good intentions go bad. Sometimes people try to help and end up making things worse. And sometimes people aren't as good as they pretend to be. The interrogation continued for hours. Detective Cole asked the same questions over and over, each time hoping to catch Marcus in a contradiction or get him to admit to something he hadn't done. But Marcus's story never changed because it was the truth, even though the truth seemed to be working against him. Meanwhile, across town, the real story was slowly starting to emerge. The 3 men who had attacked Jennifer Walsh were part of a robbery crew that had been targeting hospital workers for months. They knew that nurses and doctors often carried cash and credit cards, and they had been following Jennifer for several days, learning her routine and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Their plan had been simple: corner her in the alley where no one could see, take her money and cards, and disappear before anyone noticed. They hadn't counted on Marcus Thompson walking by at exactly the wrong moment and deciding to be a hero. When he interfered with their plan, everything went sideways, and in the chaos that followed, they managed to escape while he got blamed for their crimes. But the truth has a way of coming out even when it seems impossible. While Marcus sat in his cell waiting for a bail hearing he couldn't afford, forces beyond his control were already working to clear his name. The story of his arrest had reached someone who had the power to make things right, and that person was not going to let an innocent man pay for someone else's crimes. Back at the police station, Detective Cole was beginning to have doubts about the case. Something about Marcus's story felt true, even though the evidence suggested otherwise. Good cops learn to trust their instincts, and Cole's instincts were telling him that there was more to this story than met the eye. Detective Cole arrived at the hospital on a rainy Thursday afternoon, carrying a cup of coffee and a folder full of questions he hoped Jennifer Walsh could answer. The neurologist had told him that Jennifer's memory was slowly improving, and that she was starting to remember more details about the incident. But memories recovered from trauma were often unreliable, and Cole knew he had to be careful not to influence what she remembered. Jennifer was sitting up in her hospital bed when Cole entered her room. She looked much better than she had a few days earlier, with color returning to her cheeks and the confusion clearing from her eyes. She smiled when she saw the detective, though Cole could tell she was still nervous about discussing what had happened. "How are you feeling today, Miss Walsh?" Cole asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "The doctors say you're making good progress." Jennifer nodded slowly. "Much better, thank you. And my memory is starting to come back. It's still a bit fuzzy, but I'm remembering more each day." She paused and looked down at her hands. "I keep thinking about that man who was arrested. The one they say attacked me. Something about that doesn't feel right." Cole leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean it doesn't feel right?" "I've been trying to remember exactly what happened, and I keep having this feeling that he was trying to help me, not hurt me. But everything is so mixed up in my head that I can't be sure." Jennifer looked up at Cole with worried eyes. "What if we arrested the wrong person?" This was exactly what Cole had been hoping to hear. "Let's take it slowly," he said. "Don't try to remember everything at once. Just focus on the very beginning. What's the first thing you remember about that morning?" Jennifer closed her eyes and concentrated. "I was walking to my car after my shift ended. I work the night shift at the emergency room and I was tired. I remember thinking about going home and getting some sleep. She opened her eyes. Then I remember someone calling my name. Someone called your name? Cole asked. Do you remember who? That's the strange part. When I turned around, I saw 3 men walking toward me. They knew my name, and they seemed to know that I was a nurse. One of them said something about how nurses always carry cash for emergencies. Jennifer's voice became more confident as the memories solidified. They weren't asking for help. They were threatening me. Cole felt a surge of excitement but kept his voice calm. What happened next? They forced me into the alley behind the pharmacy. I tried to scream, but one of them covered my mouth. They wanted my purse and my credit cards, and when I tried to resist, one of them hit me. Jennifer touched the side of her head where a bruise was still visible. That's when I started screaming for help. And then what happened? Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes closed as she searched her memory. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy boots on concrete. The 3 men heard it too, and they got nervous. One of them said something like, "Someone's coming," and they all turned toward the mouth of the alley. Cole held his breath as Jennifer continued. A big man in work clothes appeared at the end of the alley. He looked concerned, not angry. He asked if everything was okay, and I could tell he was genuinely worried about me. The 3 men who had been attacking me tried to act like nothing was wrong, but the man in work clothes wasn't buying it. What did the man in work clothes do? He told me to run, and he stepped between me and the 3 men who had been hurting me. They started fighting, and I ran toward the street to get help. The last thing I remember clearly is calling 911 from the sidewalk. Jennifer opened her eyes and looked directly at Cole. Detective, that man saved my life. He risked himself to protect a complete stranger, and now he's in jail because of me. Cole felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that Jennifer's memory had returned and that Marcus's innocence was now clear. Anger that an innocent man had spent days in jail while the real criminals remained free. Miss Walsh, are you absolutely certain about what you remember? This is very important. I'm completely certain, Jennifer said firmly. I remember now that there were 3 attackers, and I remember that the man in work clothes was trying to help me. His name is Marcus, isn't it? Marcus Thompson? Cole nodded. That's right. And thanks to you, we're going to be able to clear his name and go after the real criminals. But even as Cole prepared to take Jennifer's new statement and begin the process of freeing Marcus, he knew that the damage had already been done. Marcus had lost his job because of the arrest. His reputation in the community had been destroyed. His family had suffered through days of shame and embarrassment, all because he had tried to do the right thing. The detective also knew that this story was about to take an unexpected turn. Word of Marcus's situation had reached some very important people, and they were not happy about what had happened to a man who had risked everything to help a stranger. Sometimes justice comes from the courts, and sometimes it comes from much higher up the chain of command. As Cole left the hospital to begin the paperwork that would free Marcus Thompson, he had no idea that the governor of the state had already heard about the case and was making plans to ensure that Marcus would be compensated for his courage, not punished for it. The wheels of justice were about to turn in a way that no one could have predicted. News of Jennifer Walsh's recovered memory spread quickly through the police department and the prosecutor's office. Within hours of Detective Cole taking her official statement, the charges against Marcus Thompson were dropped and he was released from jail. But the damage to his life had already been severe, and simply being declared innocent wasn't enough to undo what had been done to him and his family. Marcus walked out of the county jail on Friday afternoon, squinting in the bright sunlight and breathing deeply of the free air. Sarah was waiting for him by the gate, tears streaming down her face as she ran to embrace her husband. They held each other for a long time, neither of them speaking, both of them trying to process the nightmare they had just lived through. I knew you were innocent, Sarah whispered against his chest. I never doubted you for a second. Marcus kissed the top of her head and closed his eyes. I know you did. That's what kept me going in there. But even as he held his wife and celebrated his freedom, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his life had been permanently changed by the events of the past week. The local news stations picked up the story of Marcus's release, but the coverage was much smaller than the original reports of his arrest. The headline "Construction worker cleared of all charges" was buried on page 6 of the newspaper, while his arrest had been front-page news. The damage to his reputation would take much longer to repair than it had taken to destroy. Marcus's construction company had fired him the day after his arrest, not wanting to be associated with someone who had allegedly attacked a nurse. Even though he was now proven innocent, his supervisor told him that they had already hired someone else to replace him and didn't have any openings. Other construction companies in the area had heard about the arrest and were reluctant to hire someone who had been involved in such a public scandal, even if the charges had been dropped. The financial pressure on the Thompson family was enormous. Without Marcus's income, they were struggling to pay their mortgage and basic expenses. Sarah had picked up extra shifts at the diner where she worked, but it wasn't enough to make up for Marcus's lost wages. They were facing the possibility of losing their home, all because Marcus had tried to help a stranger. But unknown to Marcus and Sarah, their story had caught the attention of someone with the power to make things right. Governor Patricia Williams had been following the case since the beginning, and she was outraged by what had happened to Marcus Thompson. The governor had built her political career on supporting working families and protecting people who did the right thing, even when it was difficult. Governor Williams had read every news report about the case, and she had spoken personally with Detective Cole, Jennifer Walsh, and even Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly witness whose testimony had initially seemed to implicate Marcus. The more she learned about what had actually happened, the angrier she became about the injustice that had been done to an innocent man. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Marcus had first been arrested, Governor Williams called a press conference at the state capitol. The media was expecting her to announce some new policy initiative or comment on pending legislation. Instead, they found themselves witnessing something unprecedented in the state's history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Governor Williams began, standing behind the podium with the state flag behind her, "I want to tell you about a man named Marcus Thompson." Last week, Mr. Thompson was walking home from work when he heard someone calling for help. He could have kept walking and minded his own business, but instead he risked his life to protect a stranger who was being attacked by 3 criminals. The reporters in the room began to sit up straighter, sensing that this was going to be bigger news than they had expected. For his courage and selflessness, Mr. Thompson was arrested, jailed, and had his reputation destroyed. He lost his job, he faces financial ruin, and he has been branded as a criminal in his own community. This is not the way we treat heroes in our state. Governor Williams paused and looked directly into the television cameras. "Today, I am issuing a full and complete pardon to Marcus Thompson, not because he committed any crime, but to officially and permanently clear his name. More than that, I am awarding him the State Medal of Courage, the highest honor our state can give to a civilian who risks their life to protect others." The room erupted in questions from reporters, but Governor Williams wasn't finished. Mr. Thompson's employer fired him for doing the right thing. "That ends today. I am personally ensuring that he receives a better job with better pay and full benefits, and I am establishing a fund to compensate him and his family for what they have endured." Marcus and Sarah were watching the press conference from their living room, having been told by the governor's office to tune in but not told why. As they listened to Governor Williams speak, they could hardly believe what they were hearing. Sarah started crying again, but this time the tears were from relief and gratitude rather than fear and desperation. The ceremony at the state capitol was unlike anything Marcus Thompson had ever experienced. 2 weeks after Governor Williams's press conference, Marcus found himself standing in the ornate reception hall, wearing a new suit that the governor's office had provided, preparing to receive the State Medal of Courage. Sarah stood beside him, radiant in a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, still amazed at how quickly their lives had changed. The hall was filled with dignitaries, state officials, and members of the press, but Marcus was most honored by the presence of Jennifer Walsh, who had insisted on attending the ceremony despite still recovering from her injuries. She had become more than just the victim he had helped. She had become a friend and an advocate for his cause. Governor Williams took the podium and addressed the assembled crowd. "We are here today to honor a man who embodies the very best of our state's values. Marcus Thompson could have walked away when he heard someone in trouble. He could have decided that it wasn't his problem and continued on his way home. Instead, he chose to act, knowing that he might be putting himself in danger." The governor gestured toward Marcus. "Mr. Thompson's actions remind us that heroism isn't about having superpowers or special training. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when faced with situations that test their character. It's about putting the welfare of others before your own safety and comfort. As Governor Williams pinned the State Medal of Courage to Marcus's jacket, cameras flashed and the audience applauded. But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about his father, who had died when Marcus was just 16, and wondering if his dad would have been proud of the man his son had become. The medal itself was beautiful, made of bronze and silver with the state seal prominently displayed. But more important than the physical award was what it represented. It was official recognition that Marcus had done the right thing, even when doing the right thing had cost him dearly. It was validation that courage and compassion still mattered in a world that often seemed to reward selfishness and indifference. After the ceremony, Marcus was approached by Jennifer Walsh. She walked slowly, still dealing with the effects of her concussion, but her smile was bright and genuine. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending her hand, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. You saved my life, and I will never forget that." Marcus shook her hand gently. "Please call me Marcus. And you don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should have done in that situation." Jennifer shook her head. "No, that's not true. Most people would have kept walking. Most people would have convinced themselves that it wasn't their responsibility, but you didn't. You risked everything for a complete stranger, and that makes you a hero in my book." The two of them talked for several minutes, sharing their experiences and their hopes for the future. Jennifer told Marcus that the 3 men who had attacked her had been arrested based on the sketches Tony Martinez had helped create. They were part of a larger criminal organization that had been terrorizing healthcare workers throughout the city, and their capture had made the streets safer for everyone. Marcus's new job was with the State Highway Department, where he would be supervising construction projects throughout the region. The pay was significantly better than his previous job, and the benefits package included full health insurance for his entire family. Governor Williams had personally ensured that Marcus would never again have to worry about losing his job for doing the right thing. But perhaps the most meaningful part of Marcus's story was how it had inspired others throughout the state. In the weeks following the medal ceremony, newspapers reported dozens of incidents where ordinary citizens had stepped up to help strangers in trouble. The governor's office received hundreds of letters from people who said that Marcus's example had motivated them to be more aware of what was happening around them and more willing to get involved when someone needed help. Marcus and Sarah used part of the compensation fund to establish a scholarship for young people in their neighborhood who wanted to pursue careers in construction, healthcare, or public safety. They wanted to honor the memory of what had happened by helping others who shared Marcus's commitment to serving their community. 6 months after that terrible morning in the alley, Marcus was walking home from his new job when he heard someone calling for help. This time it was an elderly man who had fallen on the sidewalk and couldn't get up. Without hesitation, Marcus rushed to help the man to his feet and made sure he was okay before continuing on his way. As he walked home to Sarah and the dinner she would have waiting for him, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed. He had learned that doing the right thing sometimes came with a price, but he had also learned that there were still people in the world who would stand up for justice and fairness when it mattered most. The State Medal of Courage hung in a place of honor in the Thompson home, but Marcus knew that the real reward for his actions wasn't the medal or the recognition or even the new job. The real reward was the knowledge that when faced with a choice between safety and courage, between selfishness and compassion, he had chosen to be the kind of man his father would have been proud of. And that, Marcus thought as he climbed the steps to his front door, was worth more than any medal could ever be.